All right, welcome everyone. Those of you who are here, I'm Chef Liron, and we are in the Blaise Bernstein School of Culinary Arts in the Stern Family Teaching Kitchen. I'm assuming that some of you were at Dr. Roizen's lecture yesterday, and we're gonna work on 2 recipes from his book. I'm gonna do a little changes. Meatballs, we can't do them with the buttermilk, so it's without dairy. So we're going to be doing the charred and roasted butternut squash, and we're going to do his ultimate chicken meatballs. So I'm going to go through the recipes, and then I'm kind of going to jump in back and forth depending on if it needs a little time in the oven or things like that, between the 2 recipes in the different stages. And then if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Or when we're done, you can unmute yourself, or even if we're not noticing, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. I've sent you all the recipes. It's pretty much copied from his book, and in the email I wrote to you what pages in the book it's from. The only thing is that in my recipe for the chicken meatballs, it says oat milk instead of buttermilk that he uses. So we're going to get started. So I'm going to start with the butternut squash because I need the squash to cook in the oven and to soften up before we can continue with that. So the butternut squash goes with the Swiss chard. We have it over here, but this isn't going to take as long to cook. So we're going to set the chard aside, and basically the seasonings that go with it. We have extra virgin olive oil, garlic, salt, and pepper. And you're going to take that amount and you're going to split it in half. So half of it is going to go in now with the butternut squash, and then half of it is going to go with the chard, and it's going to be sauteed. So I'm going to take half of all of these ingredients, add them to my butternut squash, toss it together, and then I'm going to put it onto this tray and put it in the oven. Just going to get gloves. That way I can just toss it with my hands. If for whatever reason you can't hear me, please go ahead and let us know. Just making sure that all the pieces are cut up. All right, so we're going to put half of the oil. Half of the garlic.
Can I use, on the meatballs, can I use water or diluted Greek yogurt?
You can use diluted Greek yogurt. You can use broth. You can use tomato sauce. You really just need a liquid to soften up the bread. I mean, the Greek yogurt is going to give it that flavor, but you can definitely try it if you don't mind doing meat and milk together. You can try that. Add a little bit more of the oil.
And water? Can she use water?
You can use water. It's just not going to give it any flavor in addition. So it's not necessarily, I mean, you could use milk. You can use water, but maybe just not enough. It may not have as much flavor. I haven't tried it with water, so I don't know for sure to tell you.
And can you substitute ground turkey?
Yeah, you can definitely do ground turkey instead of ground chicken. Okay, so I've tossed it all together, and I am pouring it into this tray. And I'm going to spread it out a little bit. And we are going to put this into the oven. Trying to get all the garlic in there. And the oven is preheated to 350 degrees. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to start working on the meatballs. So for the meatballs, this is heavy. All right, and the bread that it says for the meatballs is whole wheat. Which one is it? It's whole grain sourdough bread. So I mean, obviously that would be the healthiest version that you could do, but if you can't find a sourdough, I would just do any other whole grain bread. Okay, we're gonna need this. So first thing we need to do, I have the bread that's all cut up and I took off all most of the crust from it. And I'm going to pour the oat milk over it. And I'm gonna put gloves on again because we just want to, I'm just gonna do one glove right now. I just wanna squish it down and make sure that all the bread gets some of that liquid. All right, and then we're gonna let that sit for about 10 minutes. Okay, in the meanwhile, I'm gonna go over the rest of the ingredients. So we have here garlic, red onion, we have rosemary, black pepper, kosher salt, red chili flakes, pepper flakes, and I use parsley. I believe that in his recipe, you can either use Italian parsley or fresh basil. I find it a little harder to get fresh basil in the stores. And so when I went out, I couldn't get any fresh basil. So I just did the parsley. People like Julie who love basil, I'm sure they would put the basil instead. And then I have the ground chicken. So it's 1 pound. Now this has been sitting for just a couple of minutes, but you can see already that it's very soft and it's absorbed a lot of the liquids. So what we're gonna do, I'm just gonna mash it up a little bit and make sure that it's all.
Also, is the rosemary fresh rosemary?
Fresh rosemary, yes, fresh. All right, and what I'm gonna do, because we don't want the excess liquid, because that's just gonna make the meatballs really, really soft. So I'm going to strain it and push out all the extra liquid. So we're gonna be left with only the liquid that's actually still inside the bread. Okay, so I have the strainer here that's sitting inside the bowl. Gonna pour it in. I'm gonna keep this bowl, I'm gonna transfer that bread back into this bowl and make our mixture in it. And I'm just pushing down and getting rid of any of that excess liquid. All right, so take that excess liquid off. We're gonna put the bread back into this bowl. All right, and now you see it's more thick. We don't have all that excess liquid. This is everything that was left that we're not gonna be using. So it's quite a lot of liquid still. Okay, and I'm gonna use this glove still. I'm gonna keep it on. And what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna add all the rest of the ingredients in here and I'm gonna mix it all together. So we have the garlic.
Liron, that looked like a lot of bread to chicken ratio. Do you find it's more than you would typically see?
It is more than I would like to use. Again, I'm following his recipe. I'm guessing because this is also a whole grain sourdough, that it's a little on the healthier side in terms of the bread, but it is more bread than I would normally put in recipes.
And where did you find your whole grain sourdough?
I didn't get a sourdough. I got a whole grain. I'm not even sure which loaf it is, but I got at Albertsons. Any store that has fresh breads, you'd have more of a chance to get it. You may be able to get something at like Bowden. Their breads are amazing, so that's always a good choice. All right, and I'm just mixing it in, and I'm trying to get all the chicken mixed in with the bread. And you could do this with a fork if you don't want to use your hands. All right. Now I'm going to switch gloves because what we need is we need to actually have wet gloves to be able to make the meatballs. We're going to set this aside. Now I'm also making these meatballs smaller than they call for in the recipe. 2 inches is very big meatballs. I'm doing them a little smaller. And so I'm getting a few more meatballs, but it's also going to help them cook a little faster. So you have a big piece of onion here. We don't need that in there. All right, and you can either have a bowl of water next to you, or you can put your hand under running water every like 2 or 3 meatballs so that it won't stick to your hands. So I'm just going to keep the water running on a little screen here behind us. All right, I'm gonna take a nice amount. I'm just gonna.
Have you ever made meatballs with an ice cream scoop?
I haven't. You can definitely do it. You'll need to have a container with water next to you so that it doesn't stick to the scoop as much. It'll still stick to it a little bit. So you see on my 3rd meatball, it's already sticking a little bit. So I'm gonna finish this one and I'm gonna put a little more water. So now, this is a very soft mixture. So this, once we have them ready, it's gonna go into the refrigerator for 30 minutes. I have some that I've already done that I'll show you.
So about how big are these?
I think these are probably like 1.5 inches. I want to say if it was 2 inches, it would probably be about this big.
Whoa, that is big.
Those are really big.
Because these 1.5, these are bigger than a golf ball.
Yes, a little bigger than a golf ball.
Yeah.
Because according to the book, this recipe makes like 9 of them. So to make 9, it would be really, really big ones.
Is there a disadvantage to baking meatballs?
It would just be, I want to say that there are different recipes for meatballs that are to be baked and different recipes that are to be cooked in sauce. And it depends on the kind of ingredients that it has in it. If it has an egg as a binder or what other kind of binder it has in it. You could always, if you cook the meatball in the sauce, this isn't that you're cooking it in oil or something like that, then you're going to get more of the flavors from the sauce into the meatball because it's going to be sitting in it for 30 minutes. So it's really going to get that additional flavors from the sauce, as opposed to bake the meatball separately and then just add it, then you're just going to get a meatball with the sauce on the side, as opposed to that additional flavor in the meatball. All right.
So in this recipe, what would be considered the binder?
The bread with the milk, buttermilk, oat milk, whatever. All right, so we're done with these, and these can go into the refrigerator. And we already have these that I've made ahead of time. I'm gonna turn on sauce.
Liron, what's the advantage of ground chicken over turkey?
You know, when it's written in here. Well,
It is.
it's written in the recipe.
Oh.
If you,
And taste, I'm talking about.
oh, and taste. She's talking about in taste, turkey.
Oh, I want to say that turkey may have a little more taste, chicken may be a little more bland. So I have here the sauce that I've already made ahead of time, and I'm just gonna put these meatballs into the sauce. I'm actually gonna and I'm not sure we're gonna have room for all of them. We'll put as many as we can. All right.
Oh, if only you guys could smell that.
All right, so we're gonna let that cook. So this needs to cook for 20 minutes covered. That's just what I wanted to be sure.
Can you use a 2 or 3 quart saucepan instead?
I wouldn't use a saucepan just because it's not gonna give you enough surface to put the meatballs in. So I would use a large skillet. I would have used a larger skillet than this if I'd have one on hand. But I think that would be better than using a saucepan. All right, so while that is cooking, we're gonna just toss the squash a little bit. All right, we want the squash to get soft, so this is still gonna take a while to rise. Okay, and in the meanwhile, we're gonna start on the sauce. Okay, so for the sauce, we're gonna start with putting the olive oil. We're gonna heat that up quickly. And we're gonna add the onions to the olive oil. We're gonna cook that for about 5 minutes until it softens and starts to get a little golden brown.
Liron, why use red onions instead of white or sweet or?
I'm not sure what his reasoning behind this. It seems that both the meatball and the sauce here have red onions in the recipe. Personally, I really like red onions. If you wanted a little sweeter, I would use the sweet onions. But if you like that little kick that you get from the onion, I would do the red onion as opposed to the white onion, just because I think the flavor is just a little better, and it gives you a little color.
So I'm looking at this while I can't see the whole recipe, but I'm just fudging until it's done, and then we can run them off. I should click this down, put it on. I've shut this
I'm
down.
gonna put a timer on for the meatballs for when we need to flip them over.
Yeah.
You think there's a rat or something?
So you had the meatballs in the refrigerator, so I could make the meatballs, I could meal prep on a Sunday and serve them on a Monday or Tuesday?
Well, according to the recipe, it says to put them into the refrigerator for 30 minutes. Not necessarily for overnight. I think that I wouldn't do it that far ahead.
Okay.
Not uncooked, just because I'm afraid that it may start, the liquids may start coming out from the bread. I wouldn't do it that far ahead.
Okay.
I mean, you could keep it a couple hours in the refrigerator as opposed to just the 30 minutes, but I wouldn't do it a day or two ahead.
Oh dear. I meal prep everything in advance. There was a question about using skillets on your burners.
Wait a
That
second.
Is there a best practice around, should it just cover the burner, or if your skillet is bigger than the burner, is that okay?
It's okay if it's bigger than the burner, obviously. Like, we have all these skillets that are really large and it only gets that center. I think it depends on the skillet. The better skillets will have a heating system that will take that heat from the center from where it gets it, and will make sure that it's even throughout the skillet. Obviously, the cheaper skillets, it may just heat exactly where the plates are and not give you an even heat throughout the skillet.
Carolyn, I hope I asked your question correctly. If I didn't, feel free to put it back in the Zoom.
It's okay.
I think Chef Liron may have just given you permission to get all new pots. That's what I heard.
Yep, I was afraid of that.
Yeah, no.
And actually, what you'll see is most of the really large skillets, what they'll say is not to use high heat. They actually say to use medium to low heat, because that helps it give the heat evenly throughout the pan and not just at that one point. So if you actually read the instructions of the pan, it says not to use high heat on them.
Do you have favorite pans that you recommend?
Not for really large skillets necessarily. I really like what I've been using here a lot are scan pans. They have them, I know, at Sur La Table, just because their nonstick is really good.
So I'm sorry, scan is like SCAN?
Yes, SCANPAN.
Okay.
But I mean, they're quite expensive, but they're really good quality. All right, so we're just gonna get this a little longer. I don't know if you can see from the top view, it's already getting softer. Because this is going into a sauce, this has a lot more oil than you need to just saute the onions. The onions are really kind of swimming in the oil.
Liron, Esther was just recommending the green pan, which I love their frying pan. So yes, so the green pan as well. I think Esther Target has them, as well as I saw them at Costco over the holidays.
All right, so I'm gonna turn this up just a little bit, try and get this cooked a little faster. We just want to see, so now that the onions are softened, I want to get that little bit of golden on the edges before I add the garlic to it. And you don't have to be constantly stirring. So right now, because this is the only thing that I'm doing, I'm kind of stirring more often. If you want to multitask and you're doing other things as you're going, or if you're prepping the rest of the recipe as you're cooking the onions, that's totally fine. Just make sure you go back and stir it every once in a while.
Liron, we've all have our friends who have nonas, who we've been hearing about them making their grandmas or their nonas red sauce for years and years and years. And I've heard that it takes all day and the tomatoes cook all day. Does this sauce get richer the longer you cook it, or?
Well, you do want to thicken the sauce, but this sauce is also from canned crushed tomatoes and not from fresh tomatoes, which I'm guessing that these sauces that you're talking about are from fresh tomatoes. And for fresh tomatoes, especially if you cook it with the skin, it takes a really long time for that skin to soften. All right, so now that it's starting to brown, I'm gonna add the garlic. We're gonna cook it for another couple of minutes. Okay, and to go with this afterwards, we have here 2 cans of crushed tomatoes. We have a little bit of that pepper flakes, dried basil here, and salt and pepper. Okay, we want the garlic just to be slightly aromatic. Once another minute or so, you can start smelling the garlic.
Throughout the day, as you're working out, you can smell the garlic.
Yeah, you'll smell it down the hall. If you ever come to work out and you can smell things down the hall, I'm probably cooking something. All right, so I'm gonna lower the heat on here for just a minute so I can pour the tomato sauce in, just because the bowl is very full. And that's gonna be the first thing that we're gonna add in. All right, I'm gonna mix it together. Make sure that the oil gets combined with the tomato sauce, fresh tomatoes. And we're gonna let this come to a simmer. Got preschool kids walking by from their enrichment.
Wondering what Chef Liron is cooking up. How long were those meatballs cooking for, by the way? I'd forgotten to ask.
So according to the recipe, it's 20 minutes on that one side, and then you flip them over and another 10 minutes. So I set the timer, we have another 6 minutes for the one side, and then we're gonna flip it over to the other side. All right, so pretty much mixed together, and it's gonna start bubbling, and I'm gonna add the rest of the seasoning. So we have pepper, we have the basil, pepper, black pepper, and kosher salt.
So Liron, do you have any recommendations for cooking on an electric stove? It always seems to be a challenge to regulate the heat.
Electric. I'm using an induction here so that I don't have to use the fan. If it's anything like that, I find that I start usually at a high heat to heat it up, because it takes time for it to really heat up the pans. But then once it's hot, I turn it down to medium heat, because otherwise it just stays really, really hot. All right, so basically this now needs to simmer for about 30 minutes or so before you can add the meatballs to it. So if you were making this at the same time, you put the meatballs in the fridge, you make the sauce. By the time the sauce is ready, the meatballs have chilled enough time in the fridge, and then you can cook them in the sauce. So really, if you need about 30 minutes for the meatballs in the fridge and for the sauce to cook, and then another 30 minutes for the meatballs, you're talking about at least an hour and a half of prep for this recipe.
So why do the meatballs need refrigerating? Why couldn't we just throw those balls in your finished sauce?
They didn't really firm up, but I think that it'll help them come together. It may fall apart just a little easier if you put it right away, because it really is very soft. All right, so this just needs to cook. We have our meatballs here, and I think I'm gonna turn this off and we're gonna start working on the chard. Okay, let's check our butter squash.
I always wonder when I'm checking food from my oven or transferring, is it okay to leave the oven door open?
It's gonna cool it off really fast. The only reason I'm not doing it here is because this oven is actually very powerful.
But at home, you would not have left it open?
No, because it would take it a really long time to come back to temperature.
And I've heard of people keeping like pizza stones or something in the oven to help regulate the heat. Does that work?
Oh, to regulate the heat of the oven? I don't think it necessarily helps to regulate the heat of the oven. For me personally, I have a thermometer in the oven just so I can always keep an eye and look at it and see the exact temperature. Ovens have, it has a thermostat so that if the light goes off or it bangs whenever it gets to the temperature, that thermostat, and I'm guessing it's a little different than Israel, but that thermostat isn't exactly at the temperature you set it to. They have a variance of a certain percentile. I think it's like between 10 and 20% actually. It's pretty big.
Wow.
That if it's at that range, it's still considered okay and not a problem. So that's why I always prefer to have a thermometer and I can know for sure what temperature it's at. You kind of learn to know your oven, and that way if you always see that it's on the lower side, then if the recipe says 350, you'll set it to 375. So that also helps you kind of know what your oven really is at when you set it at a certain temperature. So we're gonna get the chard. All right, and I have to say that I followed what he said here. If you have a salad spinner at home, I rinsed out the chard leaves and then I put them all in the salad spinner. So I cut off all the edges of the stems. And then I rinsed it, I put it in the salad spinner, and I just spun it to get all the water out. And it really did get pretty much all of the water out. Much easier than patting it with towels or paper towels or whatever. If you're gonna use it right away, definitely recommend. All right, so we're going to use a skillet and we are going to heat the oil and the garlic. All right, and next we're gonna add the chard.
Liron, can you show us a piece of chard and how you, I think I know what the rib is, but could you show us what you do with it to get, it says you have to get rid of the rib.
Can you show us how you?
Yeah, so for me, one moment. I have one here.
All right, she's gone off camera. Now it's time for Muzak, who's gonna sing for us.
So this is a pretty flimsy one. So this is the leaf to begin with. You have two options. You can either hold it open and then cut along the two sides of the stem, or if you fold it in half, then you just need to cut along one end and it's basically cutting on both sides. So you can choose either way that you want to do.
Did that answer your question? Are we good?
Great, thank you.
So you washed it then after you cut it?
No, I washed it before.
Okay.
So I washed it, put it in the salad spinner, and then I went and I cut each leaf. Okay, that timer was for the meatballs, and they're ready to be flipped.
They buried themselves a lot more than you had buried.
Yeah, because the water kind of came up from the sauce.
Would you consider taking the meatballs after they were in the refrigerator, putting them in a hot oven to congeal them before you put them in the sauce, like for 5 or 10 minutes?
Did you hear that?
To put it in the
Oh,
hot
yes.
oven for 5-10 minutes to do what?
Congeal them, she said.
I mean, I was a little skeptic because they were still very soft.
Right.
But again, I think that it's giving you more of that sauce flavor in the meatball to be cooking it inside. And then from a meatball that was very, very soft to begin with, right now they're already firm. Like, yeah, we're gonna cook it for another 10 minutes, but it's mostly for that top part that wasn't inside the sauce that we flipped over, and not for anything else. So now we're gonna cook it
I
for
feel
10
like
more
going
minutes.
out. Just I don't know. I know this gas, it doesn't feel good.
All right, and we're gonna add the garlic here.
And it's perfect timing because according to Dr. Roizen, we can only eat this when the sun is up.
Right.
So we have a short amount of time to get these eaten. If you missed his class, I'm sure Jerry will share. He talks about intermittent fasting, and you can only eat when the sun is up.
Right. You
I
should-
love
you
that
should only
reminder,
eat when-
Julie, because
You what?
I don't follow that very well. So thanks for the
All right,
reminder.
so I don't know if you can tell, but we can smell the garlic now. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the chard. Skillet might not be big enough, but. Okay, I'm gonna lower the heat here a little bit, and I'm gonna add the salt and pepper that's left.
Liron, I've actually never had Swiss chard. Does it taste like kale? It looks like kale.
You have it?
I have.
Yeah, because I made my warm salad had both
Oh, yes,
red
I
and
enjoyed
green.
that. It was good. That's right. I had a hot salad. That was delicious. Guess I will be attending.
So like any grain, obviously it looks like it's really full to begin with, but as it gets cooked, it wilts a little bit and it gives you a little more room in the pan. Obviously, it would have been better to have a larger skillet. And I'm using the tongs here just because I really want to get that salt and pepper mixed in and not just to have clumps of it. So I'm using it and kind of like tossing it like salad, trying to get it all over. Now you see it's just been about 30, 40 seconds and it's already gone down a little bit. We have a little more room. Trying to get that garlic mixed in with it and not just to have the layer of garlic on the bottom. So I'm gonna keep the tongs for later because it's actually gonna help us to get it out. But I'm gonna go back to the spatula now that it's more manageable. It's not all the way up to the top.
A fun fact from Food Network TV is, if you guys know the host Guy Fieri of several different shows, the food that he says he cooks the most often for his family is wilted spinach, kale, or Swiss chard. He says his family eats it at least twice a week. I would have gone for pork or meat from Guy Fieri, but apparently wilted Swiss chard, kale, or spinach.
Okay. All right, so it's already wilted, but we want it to be just a little more tender. I can tell that it's still a little rough. And then once it's tender enough, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna add the butternut squash to here. So if your butternut squash was ready in advance, then you'd reheat it in with the chard. So it's okay, it doesn't have to come straight from the oven. If you did it like an hour or so before, and it was sitting on the side, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, Liron, I meal prep. We've already discussed this. Can I make the butternut squash on a Sunday and serve this on a Tuesday?
Of course, I would do the butternut squash, have it cooked and ready in the fridge, take it out and have it in room temperature while you're cooking the chard, and then add the butternut squash to it. I just wouldn't put it in like cold. I'd let it come to room temperature a little bit before you added it. I also added here a little more butternut squash than the recipe calls for. I had a few more pieces and I didn't want to lose them, so I just put it all in. I figured the more the better. All right, so we're gonna add butternut squash.
Those butternut squash are cut incredibly uniform. Is that your great knife skills?
Possibly. I'll try and show you, explain to you how I cut it, which makes it really easy to cut. All right, so since the butternut squash was already hot when we put it in here, this is ready to go.
Smells good, looks delicious.
And the meatballs have about 2 more minutes. All right, we're gonna take the tongs. We have this. All right, for the 2 minutes that we have left, I'm actually gonna try and quickly show you theoretically how I cut the butternut squash. So I only use, the butternut squash has the bottom part, the bell, and it has the top part. The top part doesn't have any seeds in it. The bottom part does. So what I did, these were large butternut squashes, so I only used the top part for this whole recipe. If you were using a smaller one, you may have needed to use the whole butternut squash for it. So what I did, I first cut off the edges, the tips, the top and the bottom, and then you want to cut just at the top of the bell. So you cut it at the top of the bell, and you need a sharp knife for this. If it's not a sharp and a heavy duty knife, you don't want a flimsy knife, it's not gonna cut squashes. It's gonna probably cut you. You cut it at the top of the bell, and then you have the top part, which doesn't have the center, and then the bottom part that you see has the seeds in it. So what I did for the top part, you'll hold it standing up on the cutting board, and you'll use the knife, and you'll go strip by strip to peel off the leftover skin. You can use a peeler if you want, but the knife is gonna go deeper in. Now, if you would do the peeler, you would need to do more than one time on each area, because if you notice, the butternut squash, so you have the skin, and then you have a lighter yellow part, and then you have the orange part. If you leave the lighter yellow part, that's gonna be harder. It's not gonna be as soft and the same texture as the orange part. So you really wanna get just down to the orange part. You don't wanna have the yellow part left. So once you've peeled that, you'll have a log of squash that is peeled. And the way I did it, get a knife to show you. All right, so what I did, I then took and cut off rings, which were about the 1/2 inch, 1/3 of an inch thick that you wanted. And each one of those rings, you could then cut into the squares.
All right, Liron,
Yes.
let's talk leftovers.
Okay.
So we've enjoyed a delicious meal of chicken meatballs and chard and butternut squash. We've of course saved it for lunch the next day or such. Can you just heat it up regularly? Are there any special tips, or is it just gonna be as delicious the next day?
Meatballs with tomato sauce, definitely just heat it up, just as delicious the next day.
And you would store them, meatballs within the red sauce.
Yes, definitely.
All right. And the chard and the butternut squash?
The thing with that is that the chard is gonna get cooked more when you reheat it, and so it's gonna get softer. So that may not be as good. But very hot. But I would definitely try it. I think that the butternut squash would be better if you didn't have leftovers of it. But it's always fine the next day as well. Meatballs, totally fine as leftovers.
All right, everyone, enjoy a delicious dinner.
Right,
Lunch.
does anyone have
Thank you.
questions?
Yeah, are there any questions?
You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
What about using pre-cut butternut squash?
Pre-cut.
Yeah, definitely. Trader Joe's, go ahead, use it. Don't bother.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Makes life much easier. Any other questions?
Well, I just want to say I learned a lot. So I'm going to go try these recipes. Of course, I'm going to make it with vegetarian meatballs. So that's my only difference, and I'll figure that out. So it was great.
And what's your next class, Liron?
Next class
Listen.
is Tu B'Shvat. For Tu B'Shvat. So next week I'm going to be making challahs. They are for sale. It's not going to be a class, but if you'd like a challah for Shabbat, it's going to be either the traditional challah or a spinach and cheese challah. And my challahs are all 6 braid challahs. Or The following week is Tu B'Shvat, and I am doing a class for all JCCs through JCCA. And we're going to be doing a roasted chicken and an olive oil cake.
Oh,
We hope you
yeah.
really join us for Tu B'Shvat, both to celebrate Tu B'Shvat, but to cheer Liron on as we introduce her to JCCs around the country.
Thank you so much, Liron. This was wonderful.
My pleasure.
Thank
It
you.
was-
And I think coming up after that, I heard vegetarian pot pies are coming up.
Ooh, perfect
Yep.
for me. This was wonderful. I really learned a lot, so thank you.
Me too. I'd
All
love
right, well,
for
I'm
you
glad you
sometimes. if
enjoyed.
you-
Thank you, everybody, for
you.
joining us. My battery is unfortunately dying. I perfectly timed it, so we'll probably be closing off. But
Yep.
Liron will be sending you information on all our upcoming